To continue this great conversation we've been having this morning, I'm Warren Ward from Louisiana Tech Research Institute. And it's my honor to introduce, coming to us live from the Pentagon, Lieutenant General James Dawkins, who's joining us here. General Dawkins is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration at Headquarters United States Air Force. In that position, he's responsible to the Secretary and the Chief for ensuring that the Air Force keeps its focus on the nuclear enterprise and leading Air Force strategic deterrence efforts. General Dawkins and his A-10 staff are truly the linchpin advocates, providing a clear, concise, and correct voice to best modernize our nation's foundational nuclear deterrent capabilities. Prior to his current assignment, he served as the Director of Global Power Programs, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Acquisition Technology Logistics at the Pentagon. Lieutenant General Dawkins is a command pilot with more than 3,000 hours flying fighter, reconnaissance, and bomber aircraft, and is the former commander of the mighty 8th Air Force here at Barksdale. General Dawkins is going to talk to us a little bit about the critical importance of NC3. That's Nuclear Command and Control. It's the central nervous system of the nuclear triad. After he speaks, he will field a few questions. General Dawkins, over to you, sir.
Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, wherever you may be. Hey, thanks, Peter, and really appreciate the opportunity to present some of my thoughts on Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications, or NC3. I do want to give a big shout out to the work you and the Mitchell Institute does to ensure that these difficult problems that we face as a nation and as an Air Force service as well get the attention that they deserve. I also want to thank your co-hosts, some of my old neighbors down there in Louisiana at the Cyber Innovation Center and Louisiana Tech Research Institute for their ongoing work in support of the Air Force nuclear mission. I hear you guys are doing great things to support Global Strike Command and again, the larger Air Force. I chose to speak to you about NC3 because I think it's just so critical to our deterrent. It really is the backbone of the deterrent. So as my remarks, what I plan to talk about is, give you my spin on NC3. Some of you I know this subject very well, but there may be others out there that don't. But to give you my perspective on it and how I think we need to explain it. Then I'm going to talk about the threat to NC3 as much as I can on this network. Then discuss some of the current modernization efforts that we have underway, and then bridge into what we see as the next generation of NC3. So with that, I'll get started here. So while I suspect most of the folks in the room here understand the fundamentals of NC3, I certainly hope there are people in the audience or on the net that really don't have a deep understanding of it, because we need you to ask deep and probing questions of the nuclear priesthood that knows NC3, just to really challenge and make them explain in layman's terms what NC3 is. So again, I applaud any of the folks out there that are new to this and would happily discuss these type of things with you in the future. Well, some of the tenets, NC3 comprises command, control, and communication systems that link the president and national leaders to the force. Not to be confused with NC2, we can debate that. There's nuances there, but NC2 is basically the authority and the processes we use to get messages and direction out of the force. NC3, the last C, is the communication. It's the means to conduct NC2. Without NC3, we can't effectively command and control our forces. We can't sense what's happening, respond accordingly, or disseminate appropriate orders to the force. All of these aspects are critical. Let me, break that down a little bit. We talk about detect, decide, and direct. For instance, if there's a missile launch from an adversary in the world somewhere, we've got to be able to detect that launch, whether it's through ground stations, whether it's through sea-based assets or space-based assets. Funnel that information up into a method and manner that allows decision makers to respond accordingly. Part of that is to get that information up to the president if necessary, so that they can discuss what's going on with other national leaders, to include the Secretary of Defense or the combatant commanders as well. That's that decide piece. And then again, they've got to disseminate the appropriate actions or not direct anything out to the force. Again, the difference in the nuclear piece is that only the president can direct the nuclear forces to execute or terminate those options. And for that reason, without effective command and control of the nuclear forces and without effective NC3, we can't deter our adversaries. Regardless of whether we have 10 or 1,550 nuclear weapons as limited by New START, we must have a credible and sustainable NC3 system all day, every day, under all conditions without fail. Now, for those of us who work this every day, we've got to understand that NC3 is a foreign language to most. GASN Inc. 1, GASN Inc. 2, PNVC, AEHF, Pagan, ESS, CVR Inc. 1, CVR Inc. 2, MRT, MUOS. Those acronyms might mean something to some of you, but to most they are acronym soup. And I've been working in this enterprise at the headquarters and even at the tactical and operational level for about the last 7 years in the NC2 and NC3 enterprise. And I tell you what, I still get lost at times on all the different capabilities, all the different waveforms. And if I've spent 7 years doing this, imagine how it must be for a member of Congress or other people that we seek advocacy from to understand what we're trying to get them to help us with. Furthermore, we put these acronyms, we take pictures of the systems and we put them on slides and show the connectivity through lightning bolt symbols. And those are those wonderful DISA charts, which are very helpful to understand architecture if you do systems engineering, but it's very difficult to explain to people the importance of NC3 through, acronyms and lightning bolts. So what we've got to do is break this complex network down. And so the way I like to think of it, it's basically as simple as radios. We use radios or terminals that enable command authorities to receive information and pass messages to the operators to do a specific action. And, that's basically what I told Ranking Member Reed when I went up to the Hill to talk to him about it 3 years ago. As I had a chart, and I said very simply, these are terminals we're talking about, radio terminals that go on aircraft, the same type of, same terminal, if you will, with some modifications to control heads and things like that, would go on perhaps a submarine or a satellite or in a command center. And that these terminals operate across various waveforms or pathways, whether it's ultra high frequency or UHF, very low frequency, or VLF, high frequency, also called HF. And that these waveforms and pathways are really a mix of unhardened and hardened and unencrypted and encrypted systems. So yes, it's complex. There's many different types of methods to get messages and conferencing through to the senior decision makers as well as the operators. But that's by design for redundancy so we can operate every day. Now, the way I just described some of these waveforms, I think sounds like a lot of the conventional C3 systems we use every day for conventional C2. And they are. While NC3 has NC3 specific systems, there are systems we use every day for operational conventional conflict that we do NC3 over, that we do NC2 over as well. So if we want productive NC3 partnerships, we've got to make this more understandable. So that's one of my big pushes to the team here at A10 and to the broader enterprises. We've got to make this more understandable about what NC3 and NC2 is. This is critically important as we look for synergies with the joint all-domain command and control and advanced battle management system that the Air Force is embarking on and the Joint Force actually is embarking on, and seek advocacy with Congress and other constituencies. I'll talk more about JADC2 and ABMS later, as they're called. Those in their own right, we have a challenge explaining those stories. So if we have a challenge explaining those stories and understanding exactly what ABMS and JADC2 is, it's going to be difficult to try to fold NC3 into there and leverage that work as well. As standard bearers of the nuclear enterprise, we've got to demystify NC3. Turning to the threat. So right now we're operating a legacy NC3 system that has not been comprehensively updated for quite some time. We face challenges not only from our aging components and obsolescence, but from threats that expanded and will grow. The 2018 National Defense Strategy correctly identifies that today we find ourselves in a period of long-term strategic competition with increasing challenges to U.S. military advantages, both in the conventional sphere, where we've lost some of our advanced, we used to have a lot bigger margin over adversaries. That's quickly getting smaller. It's the same piece in the nuclear realm. Russia is almost complete with its recent modernization efforts across the full range of nuclear systems. More concerningly, they are embracing a doctrine of nuclear escalation in a military conflict. They don't have a clear dividing line between conventional and nuclear. They have a fully integrated approach to nuclear and conventional conflict. Equally concerning is China's pursuit of new nuclear capabilities, tailored to achieve its national security objectives while also modernizing its conventional military. And it's got the money to do it. As days of old, a lot of people still think of China as having a minimal deterrent, just a few weapons that threaten our cities, and that's good enough. I'm here to tell you that's changing quickly as they seek to establish their own triad and increase the number of weapons they have over the next 10 to 15 years, seeking to be more at parity with the United States and Russia. Both are pursuing disruptive technologies such as hypersonics, artificial intelligence enabled by machine learning, and offensive cyber capabilities. As we consider specific threats to our NC3 enterprise, it's apparent that potential adversaries are developing capabilities to disrupt, degrade, or deny C2, or command and control, including offensive cyber and space capabilities against critical networks. They know that if they can disrupt our ability to command and control our forces, we may as well not have the forces, and that's particularly true with the nuclear enterprise. What's notable is that in the past, all we had to worry about really as far as something threatening our nuclear comms was electromagnetic pulse. Well, now we've got to worry about electronic warfare, jamming, if you will. We have to worry about cyber attacks and space attacks. We have to worry about all of this against key nodes and systems. Yet we have a legacy architecture and legacy policies and legacy thinking about threats to NC3, and we've got to really move forward in our thinking and also in what we procure as we modernize our current systems and transition to future NC3 capabilities. Speaking of our current systems, within the Department of the Air Force, we control 75% of the NC3 enterprise and, of course, 2 legs of the triad. So it should come as no surprise that the sustainment, modernization, and recapitalization of the NC3 enterprise is a top Air Force priority and one the department is investing in heavily. For the ground leg, the ICBM force is our most ready and responsive leg of the triad. It's referred to as the Minuteman III. And these ICBMs we have been the linchpin of American nuclear deterrence since their inception and will continue to underwrite U.S. national security well into the foreseeable future. Right now, we're working to ensure that the missile wing command posts remain fully connected to nuclear command and control enterprise through the Global Aircrew Strategic Network Terminal. There we go. Here's the acronym, GASNT program. So I just told you an acronym and I spelled it out, but it still may not, to the layman, tell you exactly what it does. And that's, again, this is an example of somewhere where we need to refine how we describe NC3. There are several other upgrades and modernization efforts across the Minuteman III weapon systems as well. So to ensure NC3 will be effective for the ground leg of the triad into the future, the Air Force is working to fully integrate the Minuteman III replacement, called the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, or GBSD, with our current NC3 systems. Now you might ask yourself, so why are we taking this brand new digital engineering, digital designed, open mission system architecture, ground-based strategic deterrent, which we're going to spend $95 billion on to put into the field, one missile a week for 9 years, starting in the late 20s. Why are we going to put and link into an old NC3 system? Well, because we have to. We've got to maintain our ICBMs on alert, the Minuteman III, as we transition to GBSD. But the nice thing about GBSD is because it's digital engineering as its backbone, because it's got open mission systems architectures, and that we own the intellectual property, if you will, and can write our own software, and we can bring many different vendors in. So GBSD will greatly reduce integration risk as future NC3 architectures and systems evolve. For the air leg, the bomber force, of course, comprised of B-52s and B-2s, and soon the B-21, is the most flexible and visible leg of the nuclear triad. This flexibility is necessary for escalation control and signaling. Most importantly, it's the only recallable leg of the triad. but it's only recallable if it can be reached via the comm paths. The challenging piece here for the uninitiated is it's much easier to get a message or direction to a command post or a command center or a launch facility, launch command center through terrestrial links or satellite feeds, because that facility is fixed. It's not moving. Much more difficult when you start talking about an aircraft moving through the air, doesn't have line of sight all the time with antennas. It's got to have beyond line of sight capabilities. Much more dynamic of an environment. So it's more complex to try to get messages to and from a nuclear bomber, nuclear capable bomber. Same thing applies to command centers, whether they're on the ground. Much easier to get to a command center on the ground, much more difficult, say, on the National Airborne Operations Center to ensure that we've got that assured connectivity. So on the B-52, ongoing communications capability enhancements that you may hear about are a replacement very low frequency or VLF receiver and an extremely high frequency terminal for the B-52 bomber. This capability will provide resilient and robust beyond line of sight connectivity into the 2030s. We're also sustaining the old miniature receive terminals on the B-52. And we're developing the next generation of very low frequency receivers and partnering with the Navy to improve the VLF waveform. The VLF waveform is the bread and butter, of course, for the submarine fleet. Development of a new EHF, or extremely high frequency capable family of advanced beyond line of sight terminal variants, is also in the works for the bombers. These programs must stay on track in order to keep our current force relevant. But in the face of evolving sophisticated threats and blurring nuclear thresholds, the Joint Force requires an NC3 enterprise architecture that provides nuclear command and control over assured comms for a seamless integration of conventional and nuclear forces. So how's the Air Force going to do that? I know I threw a lot at you there. Let me repeat that bottom line. We've got to have an NC3 enterprise architecture that provides NC2 over assured comms for seamless integration of conventional and nuclear forces. Again, as the adversary has blurred the lines and doesn't have clear black and white, we've got to be able to operate in, around, and through that type of a battlefield. And we have to keep that in mind as we go forward into NC3 next. So one of the ways the Air Force plans to meet the future is through that term I just threw out there. It's something STRATCOM's been pushing very hard. I know Global Strike and the NC3 centers are working it as well, called NC3 Next. Think of it as the 2B architecture and 2B systems. We realize NC3 Next will maintain and improve on the readiness and reliability of today, while also dealing with new threats from our potential adversaries. Under NC3 Next, we will transform the way in which we conceive of NC3. We don't wish to merely recapitalize along the lines of what we've been doing, but need to implement entirely new technologies, concepts, and methods for achieving dynamic and assured connectivity that can meet evolving nuclear mission requirements. This is similar to what the broader Air Force and joint community is doing with Joint All-Domain Command and Control and Advanced Battle Management Systems, so JADC2 ABMS. As such, NC3 Next and JADC2 must be linked. You know, some of the things I talk about with JADC2 and ABMS is the ability to put any sensor to any shooter. It's no different than what we're asking to do, you know, with a KN-08 coming out of North Korea or something coming out of Russia. We've got to be able to sense it, and we want to be able to put it to the shooter. The shooter just happens to be the president, or it has to get the orders from the president to actually shoot from the forces out there. So, but, you know, for us to have these linkages between NC3 Next and JADC2, we've got to have a different way of thinking about what NC3 is at its core. So it's going to take open minds from, you know, those technical NC3 experts and policymakers, you know, the nuclear priesthood of NC3. Got to have those teammates that are on this net here, listening to us now, that are in this building or at STRATCOM, think differently about what NC3 is at its core. And we've also got to work with those teams that are developing JADC2 and ABMS. Those teams are working hard, pedaling hard, working JADC2 and ABMS to sort this out and ensure that the broader community knows what we are fielding, what we seek to do conceptually as a military, and then what things we need to buy to make that happen. So those AOs in this building and in other places around the Air Force and the Joint Force, when they're working day in and day out on JADC2 and ABMS, If we make NC3 difficult for them to understand what we're talking about, they're not going to be able to spend the time necessary to help us integrate with them. So we've got to look for similarities and differences. Similarities of NC3 and NC2 with JADC2 and ABMS, and then carve out the differences, and then focus our attention on the importance of those differences. So remember in my earlier discussion about simplifying NC3 into COM terminals over pathways or waveforms. Hey, one way you can describe this to those folks that are working hard is that this is something we do every day in a typical air operations center for conventional operations. Detect, decide, direct. While I fully acknowledge that there are differences between nuclear and conventional operations and the related COM requirements, one key difference boils down to the assured connectivity from the president to the forces during highly stressed environments. And since nuclear weapons use or termination can't be delegated below the president, we must have assured comms throughout the spectrum of nuclear conflict. For most conventional operations, we delegate release authorities down several levels and can accept some lack of connectivity or spotty connectivity in the C2 architecture. But this is not the case with NC2s. So we have to establish specific hardened architectures and systems to ensure connectivity through worst day. This is often referred to by the NC3 community as the thin line. Think of it as the last line of communication capabilities and associated equipment that we know will always be there during our worst day. Another way to think about it is NC2 over assured comms. I got to be honest with you, it took me a long time, several years, before I really understood what was meant by thin line. I was walking around the Pentagon looking for where's the thin line, when I was the J33 down in the National Military Command Center. That's sort of emblematic of the challenges we face trying to explain what NC3 is and getting other folks to want to integrate and work with us as we go forward. Turning to making this simpler, there are many similarities. Absent an all-out nuclear exchange with a peer adversary that degrades or destroys all of our unprotected systems, we'll use all COM paths and waveforms available to detect, decide, and direct. And we will devolve as necessary to the thin line if required. Many of these are the same architectures and COM systems and pathways we use for conventional C2. They're also the same architectures, COM systems, and pathways we use day-to-day for NC3, and we'll use in conflict for NC3 again until we lose that ability and have to go down to this assured comms over a thin line. Moreover, as Russia and Chinese doctrine increases the integration of conventional and nuclear operations, we must also be able to operate in, around, and through the nuclear environment with our conventional and nuclear forces. And we can't conduct conventional nuclear integration without some degree of integration in our C3 systems. So we can't have this NC3 system that we just use for nuclear C2, and then a separate conventional C2 and C3 systems. We can't afford to do that. And we don't really today. But again, there's a perception that those are two distinct and separate architectures and systems. Again, there are specific things that are dedicated to NC3 that we've got to keep those and look for those capabilities to carve out. But much of this is what we do over NC2 can be used in a JADC2 ABMS environment. We've got to leverage the similarities and make exceptions for the differences. As such, NC3 modernization is intimately tied with JADC2 enabled by ABMS. Just a few points on the JADC2 and ABMS piece. So the Department of the Air Force NC3 modernization enabled by ABMS seeks to place decision-level information in warfighters' hands faster through innovation, experimentation, and rapid prototyping, and a collaborative approach with our service and industry teammates. ABMS will integrate situational data to provide decision makers a common operating picture. It will move data at machine speed across the globe and enable JADC2. Integration of NC3 with ABMS effort will ensure nuclear and conventional forces have the ability to provide synergistic effects across all domains during all phases of conflict, and will provide a bridge to a future state for NC3. This rapid exchange of information will provide senior decision makers with decision superiority in compressed and constantly evolving threat environments. And I can tell you right now, I can't think of any more compressed information requirement environment than if the president is faced with having to defend our country from a large scale or any nuclear attack, actually. So what's good for ABMS in this regard is good for NC2, NC3. This rapid decision making is going to underwrite deterrence well into the future. So ABMS not only enables conventional forces, but can also provide nuclear forces with rapid multipath transmission means that will transform NC3 from a Cold War era relic into a C2 network that operates at speeds unmatched by an adversary. While there will likely be overlap between communication systems that enable JADC2 and NC2, as I've said before, there are going to be unique NC3 systems that are still necessary to ensure NC2 remains effective all day, every day, under all circumstances, and without fail. And this isn't just, PowerPoint charts with systems and acronyms and lightning bolts. The Air Force is actively pursuing this concept today. Some of the major actions we've had taken to date include conducting aggressive concept demonstrations through a series of on-ramp exercises. So far, we have completed 3 of these exercises with ABMS and an on-ramp number 4 scheduled for the winter of 2021. Conventional nuclear integration has been an aspect of these exercises as well. The Air Force has also just announced that the ABMS Project Office will reside in the Rapid Capabilities Office, ensuring that ABMS is positioned to outpace adversary development and will obtain the necessary resourcing to realize the vision. We also are pursuing critically enabling systems such as software-defined radios and advanced cryptography, which will help diversify and expand architectures available to support NC2. So in conclusion, the great power competition has placed a renewed emphasis on nuclear deterrence, as all great powers are also nuclear weapon states. To compete, the United States has got to continue its nuclear modernization efforts. This means not only modernizing the nuclear weapons delivery systems, but also the backbone supporting these forces, which are our NC3 capabilities. With the rapid pace of technological improvements, the increasingly sophisticated threat environment, and great power competitors' commitment to defeating our military advantage, simple updates to hardware, old and new, are not enough. NC3 Next represents the future for ensuring that the President of the United States has uninterrupted command and control of nuclear forces. And this is my final point. I want this to be what resonates most with the team here. And I don't have it figured out either. I need your help. But we've got to demystify NC3. We've got to clear away legacy policies that aren't up to date with the threat and allow our innovative airmen to develop the technologically advanced structures and novel operating concepts that are required to ensure that our nuclear deterrent capability continues to underpin our conventional forces around the globe.
Thank you, General Dawkins, for taking time to share your insights with us today. On behalf of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, the Cyber Innovation Center, and Louisiana Tech Research Institute, we wish you the very best.